8. The wonderful Micromachines. To almost everything they touched, the Microteam attached their prefix. The office that 4 of them shared, sitting virtually knee to knee, had a sign on the door that said the Micropit. The room in which they held their weekly meeting was the micro-conference room. They gave out micro awards, and Carl Alsing had his micro-porch. One of them owned a van, which became the microbus. That winter, several of them would go out riding in it on Friday afternoons, when West held his own weekly meetings with his managers. Then, in the first warm days of spring, they created the outdoor microlounge, to which they now repaired on those Friday afternoons. Near one corner of the back of Building 14A/B, down a steep, man-made earthen embankment, lay a narrow slice of woods. It must have been a pasture once. An old stone wall ran through it. Several flat rocks had been removed and propped against the wall in such a way as to fashion the crude seats and backs of microchairs. The sky promised rain, and the leaves not yet being out, the lounge lay in full view of the camera mounted on the corner of the roof high above. But the several micro-kids who gathered there didn't seem to notice the weather or the camera. Their mood was altered. Reclining, they talked about computers and other social issues. "Our nightmare is that you keep getting faults. We have to do this project on the fly. Yeah, we're all flying. No, if you page fault, you have to look for it, but if you can't find it, you have to page fault to find it, and you can't page fault until you find it. That can happen with a stack fault, too. It's a basic kind of crock. Sure, there's always a way to kill a computer. We should build a trap that'll let us in for fun at the end. That's a nice concept, leaving a trapdoor for later, but a real purist would want to get into a machine built by someone else. Well, there aren't too many machines in this place that we can't control. What does it mean to understand a computer?" I inquired. "Knowing where all the electrons go. Maybe the electrons aren't in the computer at all. They just turn on the lights. Electrons are mathematical abstractions, so who can talk about electrons? We speak about electrons loosely." Everybody laughed and laughed until, it seemed, everyone forgot what they were laughing about. One micro-kid started talking about a model of computer that was 10 years old. He said they're really ancient. Uttered there beside the crumbling stone wall, the statement sounded odd. "I've been here since 7, said one of the team, apropos of nothing. "I've been here since January, said another. A couple were discussing solar energy, the military-industrial complex, and education. Engineering school was awfully specialized. Meanwhile, the liberal arts were in decline. "Liberal arts, they're not economically viable," said one. "Does that mean you should restructure education or restructure society?" said the other. "You should restructure society, that's for sure." It was a pleasant afternoon. Looking up toward the TV camera, I noticed a large bird's nest in a nearby tree. Trying to catch their mood, I said, "Look at that bird's nest. Who do you suppose lives there?" Right away, in a tone of voice expressing something like appreciation, one of the micro-kids looked up at the nest, nodded judiciously, and declaimed, "Carl Alsing." Part of the micro-team displayed a tendency to keep odd hours and play zany games. You'd expect that. Compared to that of the Hardy Boys, who were now bound by necessary schedules to the actual machine, the micro-team's job had an air of the ephemeral. In the main, they could write their code when they pleased, as long as they did it on time, which is to say, very quickly. The code, the go-between for language and machinery, is in itself odd stuff. A witch's brew, many novices feel the first time they see it work. It takes people with devious minds, micro-kid Dave Keating contended. Almost all of us fall into that category. We're not quite system bombers, but we're shaded that way somewhat. "I hire Wests. Alsing hires Alsings," said West. But both West and Alsing had chosen recruits with fine academic records, unlike their own. And in other respects, Alsing had shown eclectic taste. He hired a woman, and women were scarce in hardware design, as well as a former rock-and-roll musician. He picked some shy ones and some much given to practical jokes. At least 3 of his choices would turn out to be, when given the chance, fine engineers both of hardware and of microcode. And when he had hired Chuck Holland a couple of years earlier, this and the fact that he trained Holland was one of Alsing's crucial contributions to the project, as it turned out. He did so largely because of a piece of sculpture. "I'm working on this thing," Holland had said when in his interview Alsing had asked him what he did for fun. "Tell me about it," Alsing had said. So Holland had, and by the time he had finished, Alsing had felt sure that Holland could write microcode. It was my clue that he could make something intricate work. From a distance, Holland's sculpture looked like a rectangular cage, and closer up, a gallery of spiders' webs. It stood roughly 5 feet high. Thin steel rods attached to each other at odd angles made up the four outer walls of the cage. The top made a sort of funnel, somewhat like a coin box on a bus. Four sloping planes that narrowed down around a little hole. Rather shyly, Holland dropped a handful of silvery steel balls into this funnel, and the sculpture went to work. Within it, in puzzling shapes, lay a complex of tracks made of two thin steel rods. A ball dropped through the hole at the top. An entire section of the cage seemed to move. Inside the webbed structure, a section of the labyrinthine track swung down. The ball dropped onto it. The seesawing piece of track rose back to its starting place, blocking the next ball for a moment. Then it swung down again. The second ball dropped. In a moment, the thing was full of steel balls, and all of it was softly clanging, like a city awakening at dawn. It made you blink to watch it work. The balls, descending, seemed to cross each other's paths. Now one seemed to be in the lead, now another. They made sudden sharp turns, zipped from one side of the cage to the other, disappeared from view behind a maze of fretwork, traveling ever so slowly, and reappeared as silver blurs. Do it again? In fact, there was really just one track, and the balls went down it one by one. The track was also discontinuous. A ball rolled down one stretch of it, balancing between two rods, and the rods of the track widened just enough, at just the right spot, so that the ball would drop through from one section of track down onto another section. There are a lot of fine tolerances here. The track got a little rusty once, and then it wouldn't work, said Holland. At first, I just wanted to make it work. It was an engineering feat for me. Then I decided I wanted to hide the track, but then I decided the track's kind of neat, so I let some of it show. I wanted it to have some meaning. I have my own ideas of form, planes and so on. He ran his hand across one section of the outer walls, as if stroking an animal's fur. These wires cut this plane, and I just think that's really neat. It had taken Holland months to build this thing, taking it apart, putting it back together, taking it apart again. His father was an engineer. Chuck Holland had wielded screwdrivers and pliers for as long as he could remember. He had met his first computer in high school, and it was an old IBM, of course. Good-looking, trim, neat in his appearance, he had a wild-looking smile, which he did not often feel like showing during the season of Eagle. He did not approve of the way the group was assaulting diagnostics, and he pleaded, without success, for a more diplomatic approach. He seemed quiet, pleasant, shy, all in all somewhat like Alzing, easily overlooked, and he felt that he had been thus far in his career. Holland organized the microcode for Eagle. Each micro-instruction of a microprogram is a string of 75 units of high and low voltages, represented by zeros and ones when written down. Holland divided this standard 75-bit string into standard chunks of several bits each chunk being called a field. Each field contains some number of unique combinations of zeros and ones and affects discrete parts of the hardware. Each unique combination is what Alzing called a microverb. Holland and Ken Halberger invented definitions for every possible microverb. The result was a sort of dictionary. Adding versatility to its contents was the fact that certain microverbs could, for instance, say one thing to the ALU and something altogether different to the microsequencer. The possibilities for creating microcode full of internal contradictions were virtually unlimited. Holland had to guard against that. He drew up rules of grammar, as it were, to make sure that the code and hardware would fit together and to prevent each microprogram from interfering in some subtle way with any other. He saw to it that every microcoder consulted the others when making a change in a microverb. The microverbs and rules for their application he put into a book called UINST. U stands for micro and INST for instruction set. The Microteam called it their Bible. The Hardy Boys called it a Sears Roebuck catalog and the Microteam's wish book. UINST became a battlefield. Its contents changed every week. Holland and his troops would make their changes, and the Hardy Boys would look at UINST and say, "There's no way we can do this function and this function in hardware." The two sides would argue and work out those problems. Then the Microteam would discover something else that was hard to do in microcode, and deciding that it should be done in hardware, they would insert in the next issue of UINST this wish for a change. The Hardy Boys were on guard. They'd scan UINST carefully, looking for new Microteam mischief, and finding this new item declare, "No way we can do that in hardware." And it was back to bargaining again. Control seemed to be nowhere and everywhere at once. It was an almost tangible commodity, passed from hand to hand down the hierarchy of the group, and everyone got some. West gave Alzing responsibility for getting the microcode done on time. Retaining ultimate authority, Alsing let Holland assume almost complete technical command. And after establishing general rules and while keeping an eye on them, Holland gave each microkid virtual reign over a portion of the code. There were hundreds of basic instructions to be encoded in thousands of micro-instructions. All of the Microteam worked on recoding the old 16-bit Eclipse instructions. There were the micro-diagnostics, or the ringers, as they called them. They worked at all hours, and sometimes when the hardy boys needed a new section of code in order to move on with the debugging, they worked around the clock. Every member of the Microteam knew weeks of intense pressure, which would gradually subside and then rise again. John Blau said, "You have narrowed your field of vision to a small little world, trying to make it a vision of your own mind, and that's the kick, getting control of something. Maybe that for me describes the kick, that I can be totally in control of XSH0. That's the name of a signal, which is the electrical embodiment of an idea. It was wrong. This morning I found an easy way to fix it. It did not always seem healthy to Blau. When you're concentrating on that little world, you leave everything else out." But he had to admit he was enjoying himself. "That's the big kick," he said. "That the guys with the purse strings are trusting a bunch of kids to come up with the answer to Vax. That's what bowls me over, that they haven't just put us in a corner somewhere doing nothing." The whole process looked strange, confusing, improbable, even to some in the Eclipse group. But although the group as a whole was missing deadlines, the process seemed to be working. They were developing the hardware and microcode more or less in concert, and the Microteam was holding up its end. Although most of them were only beginners, when they delivered their code to the lab, they usually did so on time. And they made mistakes, of course, but far fewer than Alsing had expected. One main reason why they did not fall into an enthusiastic chaos was Holland himself. He helped Alsing choose the team. He organized their work. He reviewed all of it carefully. He helped mediate the battles over UINSD. He wrote some large chunks of code himself. No one had more skill than Holland at the art of intricate construction, and no one worked harder than he. Nobody had ordered him to do all this. Alsing had made the opportunity available, and Holland had signed up. On the whole, he was happy in this work. "I never had more people around me who felt like they were friends," he said. He, too, felt excitement in the air. But he had some experience. He knew that credit did not always fall to those who deserved it. Would Alsing and others take credit for things that he, Chuck Holland, had done? The fear made him gloomy sometimes. He seemed to be girding himself for disappointment. Holland did not make all arrangements. Another source of the Microteam's strength was a tool they called the simulator. They relied upon this thing. They loved it. They did not like to think where they would have been without it. And it was Alsing who arranged for the simulator in an odd sort of way. In theory, a computer can mimic the behavior of anything. It can do so accurately only if the thing being imitated is thoroughly defined. So computers achieve only partial success, at best, when instructed to simulate the behavior of a city or to foresee the future of a national economy. Computers do well, however, when imitating other machines, including other computers, unbuilt ones that exist only on the paper of an architectural specification. You make the old computer imitate the new by writing a program. This program, the simulator, makes the existing computer respond to instructions just as the contemplated, unbuilt computer should. Essentially, your program translates instructions designed for the unbuilt computer into instructions that the existing one obeys. You can create a simulator that will make an old computer ape the behavior of the fanciest new computer you can imagine. People build new computers in hardware, and not in such a program because simulators are slow. The Microteams, for instance, ran more slowly than Eagle was supposed to run by a factor of about 100,000. A simulator makes a slow computer but a fast tool. Alsing wanted one. He had often wished he had a simulator for testing and correcting microcode. On every other project, he had been forced to debug the microcode by running it on the prototype hardware of the new machine. But the hardware of the new machine was itself being debugged, and indeed could not be fully debugged without the microcode. This made for awkward situations and mysteries in the lab. If the machine failed, it was hard to know what to blame first: the hardware, the microcode, or the diagnostic program. For several years now, before every project, Alsing had held essentially the same conversation with West. "I want to build a simulator, Tom." "It'll take too long, Alsing. The machine will be debugged before you get your simulator debugged." This time, Alsing insisted. They could not build Eagle in anything like a year if they had to debug all the microcode on prototypes. If they went that way, moreover, they'd need to have at least one and probably two extra prototypes right from the start, and that would mean a doubling of the boring, grueling work of updating boards. Alsing wanted a program that would behave like a perfected eagle so that they could debug their microcodes separately from the hardware. Wes said, "Go ahead, but I bet you it'll all be over by the time you get it done." Simulators were at least 10 years old. No great mysteries surrounded them. After some calculation, however, Alsing realized that a program to simulate Eagle would be huge. It might take a seasoned programmer a year and a half to write such a thing, he figured. But Alsing kept these calculations to himself. Although his intentions were in the main unquestionably gentle, Alsing seemed to have a constitutional aversion to the direct approach. I was visiting him one evening that spring. We were sitting in his living room when the oldest of his three sons, a handsome, soft-spoken, and polite teenager, came to him complaining that all of the TV sets were broken again. "What did you want to watch?" Alsing asked him. "Charlie's Angels, Dad." "Gee, that's too bad about the TVS," said Alsing. When his son had left the room, Alsing grimaced. "I'm terrible," he said. He had grown worried that his boys were watching too much of the wrong sort of television. Evening violence and Saturday morning cartoons, he said. So one night he had gone around the house and had disabled all of the sets. On the theory that his sons would learn more from trying to repair a TV than from watching one, Alsing encouraged them to try to fix the things. He spent many pleasant Sunday mornings working on the sabotaged sets with his sons. His boys were learning more and more about TVS, but they hadn't yet gotten any of them to work. On occasion, however, when Alsing approved of a show that they wanted to watch, at least one set would, as if by magic, suddenly start working. Who would Alsing get to write the simulator? Who could do it quickly enough for the thing to be useful? On the Microteam, there was a veteran programmer, a jovial fellow named Dave Peck. Peck had a raucous laugh. It was his laugh preeminently that drove West to distraction. Data General Employee number 257, Peck had performed his full share of round-the-clock programming. He had come over from software to the Eclipse group because Alsing had promised him the chance to manage others for a change. Peck was a fast programmer. "The fastest I ever saw, the fastest in the East," said Ken Halberger. Peck said he'd been told he was fast so often that he guessed he must be. "But programming's just obvious to me." The problem was that these days, it took him a long time to talk himself into writing a big program, longer, as a rule, than it took him to write the program. Peck could turn out a simulator quickly, if anybody could. He would ultimately perform some crucial smaller programming projects for the group, about 34 in all. Like Alsing, he had been thinking on his own about a simulator for debugging microcode, just figuring out how he'd go about writing a simulator, in case he should get up the desire to do it. So far, however, the desire had not come. The group also had another programmer. Among the first of the microkids to arrive at Westboro was a 22-year-old phenomenon, a fellow with degrees in computer science and electrical engineering, and a nearly perfect academic record in those areas. His name was Neil Firth. He liked to program computers, he said. "I may be a little vain. I took a course in college in machine code. It was supposed to be a flunk-out course. To me, it was extremely simple. It's always just seemed extremely logical to me, programming." Alsing considered the situation. He had two confident programmers, one relatively inexperienced, the other reluctant. Somehow, out of the two of them, he should be able to get a simulator. He put Peck in charge of the effort, but only nominally. Shortly after Firth arrived, Alsing sat down with him and discussed ideas for a simulator. "There are a number of things you have to do to write one," said Alsing, drawing a grossly oversimplified picture of the task. "Yeah, I could do that," Firth replied. They talked about simulators with growing enthusiasm until Alsing felt they had a nice little fire going. Then casually, Alsing popped the question. "How long do you think it would take to write this simulator?" 6 weeks or 2 months, said Firth. "Oh, good," said Alsing. When he was 10 years old, Alsing remembered he was given a book called All You Need to Know About Radio and TV. When he had read it from cover to cover, he really believed that he did know everything about radios and TVs. He didn't, of course, but thinking that he did had given him the confidence to take apart radios and TVs, and in the process to learn what made them work. He had that experience in mind when he talked to Firth. When Neil said he could do it in a couple of months, he was probably thinking back to how long-term projects in college took. Firth, Alsing reasoned, had not been performing make-work projects as many neophyte engineers do their first years out of school. He didn't know what he could not do. I think that after our little talk, Neil had a picture in his mind that he knew all about simulators now. It was no problem. He could do it over the weekend. Around this time, Alsing also sat down with Peck. Firth was Peck's responsibility, Alsing said. Peck should somehow lead Firth to complete a simulator in just a few months. So Peck explained to Firth his own ideas about simulators. He laid out the basic scheme for Firth, in greater detail than Alsing had. Observing the two from a little distance, Alsing got the strong impression that while Peck and Firth liked each other, neither was about to concede that the other was a better, faster programmer. A little friendly competition might work nicely here. Alsing went to Peck and said, "We really need some sort of simulator in 6 weeks. So, Dave, why don't you do a quick and dirty one while Neil works on his bigger one?" Peck agreed. The contest began. Every so often over the next month or so, Firth would visit Alsing and tell him that his simulator was coming right along and was going to do many things that Peck's quick and dirty one would not. "Oh, good," said Alsing. Peck got his simulator written and running in about 6 weeks, right on time. One member of the Microteam used it, but only for a while. 2.5 months after Peck finished, Firth's simulator became functional. 2 months after that, Firth had refined it. He gave the Microteam a full-blown version of Eagle in a program, a wonderful machine of paper, as it were. If Firth had not built his paper Eagle, the lab might have looked like a crowded car on a commuter train. Hardy boys and micro-kids bumping into each other, all tempers on edge. Everyone arguing about whose turn it is to update boards. West threatening to throw them all out of the lab and do it himself. The debugging proceeding ever so slowly. Micro-kids writing up sections of code, then waiting in line for a chance to test them on a prototype. And after getting a crack at the prototype and finding their code doesn't work, having to set up trace after trace with logic analyzers, trying to see what's going wrong. They will be lucky if they finish this computer in 3 years. As it was in fact, the Microteam could test their code right at their desks, via their own terminals. Firth's simulator was a program stored inside their computer, the Eclipse M/600, Tracy. They merely had to feed into Tracy the microcode they wanted to test, order up the simulator, and command it to run their code. They could order the simulator to stop working at any point in a microprogram. The simulator could not tell the microcoders all by itself what was wrong with their code, but it arranged for the storage of all the necessary information about what had taken place while the code was running, and would play all of it back upon demand. Thus, without having to invent ingenious approaches with logic analyzers, the team could examine each little step in their microprograms. They could find out what was going wrong in an instant, in many cases. In the Microteam's small corner of the world, Firth's was an heroic act. When they first moved to Westboro in the summer of 1978, Firth and his wife, Lynn, lived in an apartment not far from Building 14A/B. His working day began in the shower and would continue as he walked to Westboro on those summer mornings. A lone figure walking along the side of the access road. A young man, stocky and graceful, with long black hair cut straight as a hedgerow in a line just above the shoulders, wearing glasses with large black frames and often a blue windbreaker and black shoes. At that hour there would be a torrent of cars, grim faces behind the windshields, hurrying toward the plant. But Firth hardly noticed the traffic. He was building his simulator. It was not a trivial task. Firth had to write a program for every microverb. Then he had to shuffle and reshuffle these programs. In the material Eagle, all the microverbs in a single microinstruction would be executed in parallel, at more or less the same time, between 2 ticks of the computer's clock. But the simulator was a program in which events occur one step at a time. It could execute the various microverbs of a given microinstruction only serially, one after the other. And the order in which the microverbs of a given microinstruction were executed was often crucial. One verb could, in effect, cancel another. UINSD also defined cases in which one microverb would alter the meaning of another one, and cases in which one microverb would tweak 2 different pieces of hardware and mean 2 different things to each of them. From time to time, while he was building the simulator, features of the microcode and hardware of the material Eagle would be altered. Firth had to change his simulator accordingly. Moreover, he had to make his abstract machine useful to the microkids. How would the people who were going to use the simulator extract information and give instructions? This is one of the most important and most often neglected issues that faces any programmer. Firth began his work pondering the question, and it showed. He made his paper machine completely interactive. I guess nobody considered it a possible project in the time frame, Firth said, but I didn't know that. To me, it seemed, well, challenging. It could be done. I was able to do it because I had no idea of what was going on. Usually it was, we gotta have this feature in the simulator by tomorrow or poor old John Blau won't be able to do a thing. That's usually how it was. For 2 summers during college, Firth had worked as a manual laborer for a company that produced computerized junk mail. He'd often found himself in the back room with nothing to do, and he would scout around for software documents that had been written for the company's computers. One day, he found a stack of programs that a company engineer had created. Leafing through them, he found a glaring error, one that would make it impossible for the computers to address properly junk mail bound for California. Firth had just begun to study programming, but the error was just obvious to him. Remembering this incident years later, Firth said that the engineer had probably been programming by rote. He wanted to make his program look like programs he'd seen before, and that clearly wasn't gonna work. Firth always tried to avoid such an approach. I like to work around why, he told me. I prefer not to know the established limits and what other people think when I start a project. Firth said he thought his interest in electronics began when he was 5 years old. He was at a neighbor's house playing with an electrical toy. The neighbor's son, somewhat older than he was, came in and warned him that he would get electrocuted if he did certain things with that toy. But Firth had already done all those things. I find myself very much of a loner, he said. When I was younger, I would sit and make model boats and planes endlessly. I saw him at one of the team's parties, and he was very jolly, talking fast. He often ate lunch with some of the other new recruits in the basement and had, he felt, some fine conversations with them. He said he liked technical discussions, but he also liked to talk about other matters. Like the ultimate meaning of life, he said with a grin. I like to do strange things, go off and watch a tree for an hour. I can do that. I've always found that I'm a little off the beaten track. It doesn't bother me too much. I had a big interest in abstract music in high school, and no one else liked it. Maybe I'm right, maybe they are, but as far as I'm concerned, they're entitled to their incorrect opinions. Firth didn't often mingle with the rest of the group after work. He said that was because he was married and because he had moved some distance away from Westboro. I asked him, "Do you miss the society a bit?" "I think I've always missed it, personally," he said. Firth, who was born in Canada, went to high school in a suburb of Chicago, a neighborhood in which everyone was moving somewhere upward. His father was a regional sales manager for a company in the area. Firth excelled in high school, was placed in all accelerated courses, and had no trouble with any of them. And no challenge, except the ones he found for himself in music and computers. He, too, met the machines in the form of an ancient IBM. The high school kept its machine in a little room, which was left open for him during the summers. He would go in and program the computer all morning, and in the afternoons he'd practice with the band. It was one of those first-class Midwestern high school marching bands. Firth, in a big drum major's hat, once led the band through a performance at Soldier Field in Chicago. He also played the contrabass clarinet and twice performed with his high school band under the directorship of Arthur Fiedler. He earned his spending money playing the electric bass at dances. When Firth got to college, he felt he had to choose between music and computers. He had a flaw as a musician, he decided. He would always make a mistake, and he felt he would never be quite as good at music as he'd want to be. Programming came easily to him, although he found that he had to work extremely hard to do it very well. I hate to say it, but in a way I feel that I can perfect it. He was getting accolades now for his simulator. The team would be nowhere without it. Everyone said so. Firth said, "I can't say that in all cases I'm extremely pleased with it. I guess finally it is a pretty crafty little thing, but there's some real crud at the foundation." We were sitting at a bar one long quiet afternoon. I asked Firth to explain his abstract machine to me. He tried. "Okay," he said. "I come to the simulator with the machine instructions to add 2 numbers. I also give you the microcode that tells the computer how to do the ADD. Okay, I say, simulator, execute the macro instruction, ADD, at location so-and-so in simulated memory." So I also had to simulate memory. But I also forgot to mention that when you wrote your microcode, you also coded some decode information, which is information that the IP simulator will use. He said all this and more at such a clip, one digression leading to another, that I had to laugh. He laughed too. He agreed he was a sucker for a digression. "You kept it all in your head?" I asked. "It was just obvious to me," he replied. Firth had spent about 3 months getting all the concepts behind his simulator straight, and he actually wrote the program in about a month. The rest of the time he spent on refinements. He could write 200 to 300 lines of code in his mind, but he had a hard time remembering his own phone number. Luckily for him, somewhere in the bowels of Westboro existed a computer connected to the building's phone system. Through it, you could program into your own office phone the numbers you called most often. Forever afterward, you could dial those numbers by punching out a 3-digit code. Firth could remember the 3-digit codes. He had completely forgotten his own phone number. It was a great relief to be able to do so. He did keep his number on a slip of paper in his desk drawer, though, just in case he should ever need to know it.